Here's a guy to defend William Lane Craig blaming an atheist for not being convinced by his arguments.
The clip you're about to watch features a conversation between William Lane Craig and someone who's at one of his events in the Q&A line. This particular person used to be a Christian, is now an atheist, and they are asking him, why is it that the evidence that you're presenting to me doesn't ring true? Why is it that I'm not convinced? In a sense, what am I missing is the question. It reveals something very, very interesting about not only human nature, but about how spiritual revelation, spiritual insight, spiritual learning takes place in the first place.
Yes, it reveals that it occurs irrationally.
Let's go ahead and dive into this clip, and then I'll kind of get into some of that on the back end.
I just want to say thank you, Dr. Craig, for showing up here. You are a part of my weekly podcast listening, you and Kevin, along with your Defenders podcast. I listen
Really?
to everyone's, yes.
Wow.
I like to, mix things up a little bit. I have to say that I've been a apostate for about 5 years now, and one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, so you've presented a lot of evidence tonight for the historicity of the resurrection of Jesus. Now, I don't know if that you expect that to go in the needle to peg it all the way to 100. I doubt that you do. But there are obviously people that don't accept it as compelling.
As what?
As compelling. Myself included. And I don't mean that necessarily in the philosophical sense, but just...
Okay, good. Yeah, because I'm not claiming it's compelling in the philosophical sense.
Right.
Craig's arguments are only compelling to folks who want to be compelled by them. Anyone who wants to weigh the evidence even-handedly is not going to be convinced, and Craig knows that.
But compelling in that...
Yeah,
it just
persuasive.
doesn't swing it over from the 50% plus a feather kind of thing to tip me over the edge. So I would ask you, from the heart, what am I missing? What am I missing? What am I not getting? And
Well,
I'm not.
gosh, isn't that a question I should ask you?
That's probably true.
I mean, you
But
would
I'm
be
not
the
up
one
there.
who would know.
They don't want to hear that. That's.
The simplest answer is that you have to be biased in favor of Christian dogma in order to be persuaded by any arguments in its favor.
But I'm not the only one. I'm not the only.
Yeah.
One. I guess maybe what are we? What are people not getting? Why isn't that enough? To
I mean, I think here, this gets into, again, all kinds of psychological and emotional factors.
Sure.
A person who has done what you've done, once been a Christian and now apostatized, that's such an emotional commitment and change of direction.
Just slightly.
That to reverse course and go back again is going to be, I think, really difficult and would take something very powerful. And I'm very encouraged and glad that you're here tonight and that you're listening to these podcasts. I think that's wonderful.
If you're looking for something powerful to convince you of Christianity, you're not going to get it from an apologist. I get the impression that Craig thinks that this dude must have had some kind of traumatic experience related to the church or his religious community, and that such a thing must be the explanation for his apostasy. I'm an example of someone for whom that's not the case. I became an apostate the moment I discovered it was an option. In order for me to believe in God again, it would only take something very simple: a coherent definition of what God is, and evidence that can most parsimoniously be explained by his existence. By asking for this, I don't think I'm asking for something powerful.
But it may just be that you may have a lot of emotional baggage and psychological things to work through.
It's your emotional baggage that's making you think these gas-powered lights are looking dimmer. I guess it's fitting that Craig thinks that apostasy is likely emotionally inspired because he openly admits that his own faith is emotionally inspired. Craig has admitted that he lowers his doxastic standard with respect to Christianity.
When I first heard the message of the gospel as a non-Christian high school student, that my sins could be forgiven by God, that God loved me, he loved Bill Craig, and that I could come to know him and experience eternal life with God, I thought to myself, and I'm not kidding, I thought, If there is just one chance in a million that this is true, it's worth believing.
Are preventing you from being persuaded by the evidence. But I think the evidence itself speaks for itself. It's not philosophically compelling, as you say, but I do think it's good enough to ground faith rationally.
Faith, by definition, is a belief that is not rationally grounded. As Hebrews 11:1 says, faith is belief in things not seen. It is belief without evidence. I don't think the dude asking the question is looking to ground faith. He isn't looking to believe without evidence. He's looking to be convinced by evidence.
Especially when you combine it with the arguments for God's existence. Like cosmological, teleological, moral arguments. The cumulative case for Christianity, I think, is impressive. It's like in a court of law where there may not be any single piece of evidence that convicts the accused as guilty, but it will be the cumulative force of the evidence. 20% from the cosmological argument, 30% from the teleological argument, 15% from the resurrection of Jesus, say. And even though none of those is over 50%, the cumulative force of the evidence can be such that it does provide a case that is compelling.
If he is, as he said, willing to believe in Christianity if there is only a 1 in a million chance that it's true, then any argument or set of arguments only have to amount to 1/1,000,000th of a convincing argument. One argument can be 20% of a millionth of a convincing argument, and another could be 30% of a millionth of a convincing argument. And if they just cumulatively add up to a millionth of a convincing argument, that's good enough for Craig. So you see, the problem of the guy asking the question is that he's not willing to lower his doxastic standard to however low it has to be to find Craig's arguments convincing. The unwillingness to be so absurdly credulous seems to be a vice from Craig's perspective.
In the sense that you're well within your rational rights to embrace this. And whatever it was that led you to walk away from it in the beginning.
In my case, it was basic critical thinking skills.
Maybe what you come back to won't involve some of those same offensive elements that troubled you. Maybe the Christianity you come back to will be a somewhat different shape that won't involve maybe, I'm just guessing, an abusive church situation or wooden fundamentalism
or an untenable and often outright incoherent set of beliefs. If I go back to Christianity, will those be gone? Will God no longer be defined as timeless and spaceless, as Craig describes him, if I return to Christianity?
Whatever it might be, I want to invite you to come back to what C.S. Lewis called mere Christianity.
I know, yeah. Well, thank you for the work you've done, and I really appreciate you coming out tonight. So.
There's a band called Dawes that has a song lyric that says, "The bigger the telescope, the brighter the stars." And that gets at this idea that the actual thing that you're seeing through plays a role in your ability to see what do you see, how much of it do you see, right?
So I should put down the basic critical thinking telescope and pick up the credulity of wishful thinking telescope that Craig effectively admits to using, right? Also, as a former Christian, would the guy asking the question not have been looking through a Christian telescope? Or did he commit the grievous error of picking up a critical thinking telescope like I did?
Christ also talks about this idea of people who have ears to hear, people who have eyes to see. The implication being that there are also people who don't. So the lens that you're looking through impacts your ability to see reality itself. And so that being said, though, I love this guy's honesty. I don't really think that he's trolling in the same way that I do, often see even in the comments of these videos. I actually think that he's being relatively genuine, and he's saying, like, why can't I see the stars that you can see? What's wrong with my lens? What's wrong with my telescope? I think that is a fantastic question to ask. The Bible literally does deal with the same point as well, where it says, Jeremiah 29:13 says, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart."
In other words, you'll believe in Jesus when you are sufficiently biased in favor of doing so.
Lastly, John 20:29, Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." And so there's this is really getting at this idea of faith.
That passage is from when Jesus showed Thomas his wounds in order to convince him that he really rose from the dead. When Jesus said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and have yet believed," it sounds to me like he's admonishing those who insist on basing their beliefs on evidence. Jesus seems to think that it is better to believe without evidence than it is to base one's beliefs on evidence. You're just not as blessed, if you apply any critical thinking skills to Christian dogma, as someone who believes it in the absence of any evidence that it is, in fact, true. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.